Welcome. This is the Leadership for Society, the Race and Power series, and I'm Brian Lowery, a professor at Stanford University at the Graduate School of Business. And today I'm talking about environmental justice with Leslie Fields, the National Director, Policy, Advocacy, and Legal for the Sierra Club, and Tamara Toles O'Laughlin. Most recently, Tamara was the North American Director at 350.org, and now she's a self-described free radical. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Great. So I just wanted to
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great. So I just wanted to start off by asking you all to describe for us the nature of environmental justice. What exactly is environmental justice? I'll start with you, Leslie. You go first.
Okay, thanks so much. Thank you for this opportunity. It's wonderful to be here this evening. So the technical definition of environmental justice is the meaningful involvement and fair treatment of all people, regardless of race, color, natural origin of income, and other vulnerabilities to respect of the implementation, the development, and enforcement of environmental laws, policies, and regulations. And fair treatment meaning that the burdens and benefits of our society are equally distributed, should be equally distributed, but they're not. And due to our legacy and history of colonialism, slavery, of Native Americans and Africans who were brought over, and also the pillaging of the environment, and then deep segregation, internal racist terrorism, and then redlining, and now gentrification. We have a society that is deeply unequal and has been segregated for a long time. And so there's been an issue, there's been lots and lots of examples all around the country and the world of disproportionate siting of industrial facilities in communities of color and low-income communities. Great, so thanks. We work to support these communities so that they are not always the having to just get the burdens of this pollution, industrial pollution since the Industrial Revolution, but are also availed of the benefits. And there's so many ways to get involved in this. I love EJ because I meet the best people in the world. It's taken me all over the world. I'm here with you all tonight. I've gotten to know wonderful people like my dear friend Tamara, who's here with us. And so anybody can get involved. You can be a young person, you can be a grandmama, you can be any kind of tradesperson, teacher, and it's about protecting and promoting and enjoying your community. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Great, thanks. Tamara, I have a question. That is a very broad description. So help me think about how that's related to racial justice. So how do you connect it to racial justice?
Yeah, well, one thing I'll say right out the bat is that a good human that I am fortunate enough to know and be friends with, along with Leslie, Vernice Miller Travis, has defined environmental justice as a lens that you put on other systems. And it seems to me like the best descriptor, because you put it onto building codes and you suddenly start to see disparities. You add it to highways and byways and where they're sited and you start to see more. So it actually is just a really great lens on whether systems are acting as designed and who that design helps and who it doesn't. I would also flag that the federal government's definition of environmental justice is about their relationship to resources. And I am always challenging communities and folks to just question, is that our definition? Like, do we need to accept the definition that the federal government has for itself for dealing with resources that come from all of us into the commons and disappear into government? So I have a lot of questions around environmental justice frameworks, because it is my opinion that people do justice, institutions do not do justice, and they're for very real reasons. Human beings live in a human level life cycle, and institutions carry the things we want into generations. And so what we need to be looking for when it comes down to it is equity from institutions, because they can carry that work out from one generation to the next, but they cannot do the work of justice because it is a central precept to a liberative narrative, which governments don't lend themselves to, because we're buying into a Leviathan that keeps most of us safe by villainizing other people. So there's lots to say about all of that, but the big takeaway is just that the question around what environmental justice means has been defined by the folks who came up with the principles, has been bastardized by the government at various levels, and even as the halls of Congress and all the branches, except for the SCOTUS, are being filled with people I really like and respect. Like, I'm just flagging that title itself is a misnomer for what justice would actually look like, and in an environmental context, which we have yet to see because we've wasted about 40 years of doing it.
Mm-hmm. So I'm happy you brought up government. I wanted to ask a question that was raised by the recent riots at the Capitol. So one of the things that the people there were talking about was taking back their government. So there's a sense of ownership in this country, and certain people feel like they own the country. And it made me wonder how to think about ownership and the environment, right? Who owns the environment? Who is it in service of? How do you think about that idea of ownership and the environment?
I'll start if it's okay, and I'll say that I think ownership of the environment is a colonialist concept. It's a social construct that has no basis in reality, kind of like time, but we keep showing up for that. So I'm not gonna cause all the problems in one conversation, but I do think that we have failed if we start with the idea that you can own what is free to everyone. Clean air, clean water, resources as they have come have been taken through lots of systems to become the property of others. Whether we're talking about riparian rights, if you live in front of water, the idea that the same folks who polluted the air, who have taken our ability to have multi-generational health, who have destroyed people from the inside out, can then sell us bottled water and air purifiers and the things that would have come naturally through Earth's life cycles. Like, the concept of owning any of that is really selfish, is very myopic. It's I wish it was as modern as it sounds like, because we're living in a time when the stock market is selling water shares. Like, we're living in a real moment where farmers are betting against themselves on climate change to make more money to cover their costs when the rain doesn't come and they can't grow food. So I'm just flagging that, like, there are real life implications to these things that seem big and spacious and conceptual, but the idea of ownership is not indigenous work. And indigeneity is not about the people in this place. It's about the people of every place. A really good friend of mine, Judith LeBlanc at Native Organizers Alliance, talks a lot about the fact that indigeneity is about having a relationship to the land, not a relationship to rights. You just have to assert your rights when people bring ownership into a conversation that's really about stewardship. We don't live forever. The things we have do not last forever. We're a series of stewards pretending to own things. So it's a big conversation, and it's one that we're going to have as climate change makes resources scarce.
Did you want to add to that, Leslie?
I don't know if I can. All right. I think that was beautifully said. I just wanted to say, in terms of like this, for the spirituality of it, that we are only here for temporary, and we should be making sure that we are taking care of this planet and our communities for our kids and future generations. Like many traditions all over the world have taught us, and many faith traditions have told us. But I think Tamara said it best. And so there is this idea of owning, the government, the whole issue of that, about who we, the people, are. We know that the first, 8 presidents were enslaved people who looked like us. And so they didn't include us as being people. So it really has been about asserting our personhood and asserting our rights as human beings. and human rights being really paramount. So, you know, and it's complicated, as Tamara says, but I think that we have to really be mindful that this really precious little marble planet, you know, should be lasting longer and should be being taken better care of for the future generations, the seventh generations, and the seventh generations behind them.
Mm-hmm. So I want to kind of circle back, Tamara, to the idea of ownership, because I think you're making a very powerful point. So ownership is the basis of our economy now. So I just I want to point that out. So how would you think about shifting the way we engage, not just with the environment, because presumably that would extend beyond the environment? Like, so give me a sense of what kind of solutions you would suggest that shift the way we think about ownership.
Yeah, so I'm going to introduce another term, racist capital. And I think in the experiment that we live our lives in America, it is essentially a racist widget machine. Everything it produces separates people by class, by race, includes them in specific things and excludes them in a very significant number of other things in order to sort people. To some extent, I feel like I've thought about this so much that it feels to me like racism is just an ATM. And we use it to move money through different places by raising it up where we might otherwise have to talk about splitting the pie on something. And so in the context of ownership, of thinking about racist capital, of thinking about solutions, there are a couple of things that I love. So my specialty, no matter what hat I'm wearing, are things that are both impossible and essential, things that are necessary. And the list of things I'm working on that are around that relate to that are fossil fuel nonproliferation, just like nuclear. We need to have a conversation where we are really clear that we need to get an inventory of all the bad things, because the stranded assets aren't just what are defined by Shell and Texaco and Abengoa and all these different companies that own things that used to be free to people. Like, that inventory has to be managed by everybody. The other thing that comes with that is a decision that we all make for a just transition in whatever that context is, and agree to do it. So super excited about that. The scarier part of that is climate reparations, because in the world where we are talking about climate for Black lives, the movement for Black lives, visions for Black lives that are radical and are about our liberation, at the same time as we're talking about land back, what both of those things are getting at is where equity comes into play when we stop talking about stories of harm and start talking about what that harm has wrought. And so I do think we're in a moment where we have to examine, what does it mean for us to hold people accountable? That's true whether we're talking about the insurrection of just a couple of Wednesdays ago, or the seeming reformation that happened after the next Wednesday after that. It's like a movie, and one episode ended and we're on to the next part of the story arc. We're not, because we have failed to hold folks accountable. The things that you need in order to get to climate reparations are, one, an admission that you have done something, that you've harmed people. You have to acknowledge it. And then when you say you're sorry, you agree to either to no longer do the thing anymore, to cease the behavior, to give people some token of what they have lost. I am not the owner of these thoughts. Maxine Burkett wrote a law review article about it in 2009. Sonia Klinsky has been working on loss and damage in the global context. Sandy Darity has been working on Black reparations along with many other folks. And Cobra originally started talking about this. We've been trying to answer the question of ownership, justice, and solutions for a really long time, negotiating it inside of a system that really isn't interested in that, because it continues to make money every day that we don't talk about racist capital. So lots to say about that, but I do think the solutions are about radical transformation of the system. So in the same ways that we have crumbling infrastructure in the US, imagine that all that US infrastructure was built in order to suppress people, separate them from resources, and keep people defined in a class specific life, and you'd be right on. Those aren't just highways. So we're gonna have to, I think of it as a redesign. We're suffering from poor design, ending where it has been designed to lead us. And the question of our age is, are we going to stand up and do the redesign, or are we going to die along with all this infrastructure and stranded assets that don't matter for us?
So I'm tempted to ask what the redesign looks like. That's probably an unfair question, what this new system actually looks like, but I'll leave that. If you have an answer, I'll leave it there.
I mean, I think there is no full answer to it. I think we're going to have to design around climate change in a way that I've seen very few folks tackle it. So I have a book to my left called 2100 Dystopia. It is a book that looks at, if we're right about our climate projections, what kind of housing can exist in each one of these places. It is a great read after you watched a lot of comedy and had a lot of joy and hugged a lot of babies and kissed a lot of poodles, because as soon as you read that, you're like, what? How much flooding is there going to be? We're going to have a house that is flooded 80% of the year and still functions as a house. Well, for a lot of people, because 1 in 4 of us will become climate refugees because of what we've already done, that is real. So I do have ideas of where we could point people. I also think for the conservation industrial complex, it's time for those of us who have the name wilderness in our name to close and give all of our resources to the folks who are calling for land back, because stewardship and redistribution has been happening for every genre before now. And before we erected the environmental nonprofit industrial complex, we figured out how to move things and people, and folks were nomadic, and they made these changes in decisions that weren't about fundraising and philanthropy. And so there's a lot to say about all of those things, but I do think there are solutions. They don't belong to any one person. Tons of communities have them and have been using them to survive the system that they live in now.
So this sounds like, a lot of what you're saying sounds like it pushes against the existing system, but there's so much power in the existing system that it's hard not to work from inside it as well. And you both have, to their varying degrees, worked inside systems, let's say, and here I mean governmental systems, and from the outside. So how do you think about the difference between working inside the system versus working outside of the system? So Leslie, I'll leave that one to you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's something I think about, working inside a very large, predominantly white, nonprofit organization. It was founded in California, in 1892. John Muir took Teddy Roosevelt out to the woods, and, that became Yosemite. And in order to do that, you had to kick the people out who were living there, which were the indigenous folks. And that became the basis of, the whole world park system. I mean, you can't live in a park. So there's lots of land claims, as Tamara has been alluding to, all over the world for parks that have been created. And so, working in the system has been, working in that system, I've worked in government, I've worked in the private sector a teeny tiny bit. So it's a microcosm of our larger society. I mean, it's not anything special. So it's everything that Tamara has been saying. And, the environmental conservation, that sector grew out of that whole parks world. And it was very exclusionary. It was very, very segregationist. It was for upper middle class people to go to the parks. If you watch that Ken Burns special about the American parks, the best idea ever or something, they had advertisements, they had ad campaigns for upper middle class people to take trains out to the parks. These are America's cathedrals. Don't go to the European capitals and cathedrals, come to America's cathedrals, as in the Grand Canyon. And so, but it was completely exclusionary. So working in that has been very, very interesting. And there are a lot of folks who don't ascribe to that. Like I said, it's a microcosm. So we have people who maintain that system, but also there are people who are pushing against it. There are people who are wanting to expanding against it, and it's a significant sector. And so it's with all the, and it's taken a lot to get them to realize that not just the environmental justice movement, but also the fact that the United States is not just this big ball out here and everyone should be responding to it. Yeah. And that the United States, in terms of the way we deal with all of the treaties and all of the international work, that we're only, 4% of the world's population, and we use up 25% of the world's resources. Mm-hmm. We take up a lot of energy. So it's with all of that we have to, working in that, to leverage leverage opportunities for change, and then also have to do the reform at the same time. And so that has been a push-pull that I've spent a lot of time in, and I'm, on my own free will. And it's been a place where there has been some movement. We've done some work. We've done a lot. But we have a long, long way to go. Understanding that we're in this capitalist system, and that in order to function, we have to play in that, that whole foundation, donor, industrial complex, and do all of that. And so, like I said, it's a microcosm, and it's very interesting at the same time. And so, but all these sectors are all facing what, had been going on for a very, very long time. And the only thing that had changed was that there are, for some of, from the summer, from the murders, was that there's, cameras on cell phones. And so that has become a real rift within a lot of sectors, including the environmental nonprofit sector. And I don't see them any different from many other sectors. I don't consider them that they're all reflective of our larger American society, which, needs to be, I don't know if it can be taken, I don't know if it can be changed as much as, and this is maybe where Tamara and I differ, as much as that what's left to reform it and how to reform it. Whether it's academia, whether it's nonprofits, whether it's government, it's, they're all, people are very, very invested in them. And when you talk about that, then you get, if you don't do the personal change, you don't do the internal work, it's going to be very hard to get anyone to do the external work as well. So the internal reflects the external. And unfortunately, what we've seen this summer is that, there had to be all this Black pain and all this murder for a lot of other people to realize that we are still in this macro system of racism and white supremacy.
So I want to make sure I got it right. Did you say that there's been a rift in the environmental justice movement as a function of what's been going on?
No, not a rift. I mean a rift in the environmental movement. I didn't mean an EJ movement.
Oh, so a rift. And what was the nature of the rift in the environmental movement? What happened?
Well, the rift has been the fact that we are having to expand to do work and justice. All right. As opposed from the original conservation, you have to join an organization to be considered an environmentalist. I grew up hunting and fishing with my grandparents out and learning about nature that way. We fished all the time. And so every culture fishes. That is the world. Every world civilization is founded on some river water body. Everyone fished for that abundant source of protein. So the idea that you have to join a group, or you have to join a recreation, a conservation group, not just a Sierra Club, in order to be considered caring about the environment is just really a fallacy. Lots of people are great stewards of the environment. Lots of people know nothing but being out and could run rings around a lot of folks, but they don't necessarily belong to an organization, and they don't, and that's not, so that's the change, I think, and that's been very good.
Okay, I see.
So I can support that and be Leslie's anger translator and say, yeah, murder everybody, save that grass is not really conservation. So like if you want to see conservation has grown, talk about the fight for sage grouse, because it just like people fought and then basically died, like to preserve a specific thing at the cost of everything around it. There's a specific kind of blindness. It's like systemic blindness. It is a set of choice points that feel like reality. Politics itself is a set of choices we've made in a container of other choices we made about governance. So I think it's really important for us to lift up how business, government, people all work together in a set of agreements. The redesign part that I referred to earlier is, do we want to keep those agreements? Most of us woke up and we were born into a set of agreements. Feels like they're not really working in favor of the largest number of us who want to see change happen. Seems like a good time to renegotiate.
Okay, good. That's a great segue into the next question, which is, there's no free lunch, right? So if it's not going to be easy. So I'm curious how you think about, or let me say it differently, what challenges do your solutions create?
Since I'm a fan of solutions, I'll start and say challenges. I have been called racially insensitive. And I said, you're damn right. I make racists feel deeply uncomfortable, largely because it is a set of choices that we've made about how we organize ourselves as people who scientifically have no other differences. So given that we have labored to build one set of constructs on another set of constructs, the idea that we will suddenly uproot folks who are totally invested in the future as it relates to the past they signed on for creates multi-generational conflicts. In environmental work, in my count, there are 4 generations of us pushing for this at the same time. People who just wanted to save a tree and ended up with a job after a party at Woodstock are standing next to folks who watched every documentary on Netflix, read every book by Bill McKibben, have been so radicalized into wanting to not die in a fiery gas ball that they have given up education and all of the pursuits of youth, which usually make it worth doing, to fight climate change. And all these folks are sort of in the same stew of trying to keep us from dying on a fiery gas ball at the same time. The multi-generational conflict between them is what happens when people who are deeply invested in this system run into conflict about the same set of resources with people who have nothing but debt. So the only entree they have into the system is continuing to be embedded in agreements they did not make. And that creates a lot of conflicts. One way to deal with it is to weaponize your pension. Maybe if the folks who are leaving the planet stop investing every dollar they have until the day they die in a system that's not serving them now and will not serve the future, there's a set of things we could do together. If we start to talk about the gig economy, as a person who has been an employer of many people, I can assure you that the latest generation of folks have the same gold watch 30-year dreams that their family members had, but they live in a gig economy. So they don't have the same rights as other folks, not tied to the same things. They don't stay in the same jobs as long. So we have a job market that no longer serves people. We have unions that are trying to figure out how to flex into what that means, because COVID has proven that if you don't have a plan for it, people are unrepresented and they lose their lives because they don't have collective bargaining to give them a seat at the table. And so I have watched unions start to shift around this conversation. And some of them have said, we are brick and mortar. We have a view to the White House. We are not changing anything. And other folks have said, you're not represented by us, but we're about to represent you because you're just out here dying because you have no contract that allows you to go home when a pandemic hits. And so there are I think the old ways are getting shredded. The conflicts are people who want to hold on to the past at all costs and folks who are willing to call the question and sit down and discuss it. So I think that there are tons of problems, but they often fall in that rift of the generations. And we could fix it if we just wanted to ask more questions than prescribe things for other folks.
So okay, I'm gonna push back because we could fix it. That's the part I'm worried about, right? Because the we could fix it sounds like there is this utopian possibility if only everybody got on the same page, and I am deeply skeptical of utopian possibilities. So I'm wondering in this new world, what that you're trying to create? What are the fears that you have, or what are the fears that people that are listening should have if I make you, Leslie, or you, Tamara, dictator for the day? What should I be worried about?
Leslie,
well, I'll tell you what I'm worried about is just, I'm worried about the incrementalism. I am worried that we are, we just came through, I don't know if we're supposed to be nonpartisan or not, but I don't care. I mean, we just came through this fire, really just this purgatory of election. I mean, all the blood, sweat, and tears, the people having to go out and vote in a pandemic, okay, over and over again. Yeah. And that requiring the same people, basically working class Black women out there having to stand in line during a pandemic and vote. And, so I think that there's some big, huge things that can be done if we had the political will to do them. And so, we're just not going to, people are taking a breath right now. I live a mile from the Capitol. I live on Capitol Hill, and it was very traumatic what happened on January 6th. It was just, and having the military zooming up and down and the sirens and the helicopters, and it's a beautiful community. It's not, this is why we have to be a state in the District of Columbia. So all of you out there, tell your representatives to vote for HR 51, DC statehood.
I know.
Because we do have taxation representation. We have more people than 8 states, and it's still a majority people of color. So we really have to go bolder and bigger, and it's been done before, and it shouldn't take I don't know if I guess it just shouldn't take crises all the time. It took a depression to get the New Deal. It took World War II to pull us out of the depression, right? So, that's how it is in this country. And when my uncle James came back from World War II, he didn't get it, after fighting fascism, then he had the, fascism and racism and Jim Crow here. And the only job he could find was still a job in a uniform, and he was a hotel doorman when he should have been able to go to grad school. And really, and it was a frustrated person, and that just is just tragic. So we can't waste anybody's potential anymore. And we have to, and I think people really do need to get punished. I'm a practicing Catholic, so I really believe in penance, all right? And that you go to confession and you confess, and then you get a penance. You have to admit your wrongdoing and repair and do a penance. And so what Tamara said earlier, I think, is that there really has to be a reckoning on so many levels. They're starting to do it in terms of this impeachment. We have to do this. We have to convict former President Trump. Every other country goes after their dictators after they've gone out, left office. And so that he can't get a pension. So he can't get federal funds for a library, which would probably be like in a closet. He can't get protection, all these goodies you get. And then he doesn't run again. Those people who tore up DC 3 weeks before January 6th, and then came back, the Proud Boys, and then came back and stormed the Capitol. They're finally going after these people. Okay, so these things have to happen in a rule of law, and we have not been practicing the rule of law in our society. And it's been well known that white supremacists are not considered terrorists. Terrorists are people who are brown and black in this country, and that is finally starting to change. But some people had to die before that happened. So I want to go big. And hopefully people won't have to die to do that, which is usually our history.
Yes.
So let me state this in a slightly different way. There are a lot of people who are resisting what you all are suggesting we need to do. There are also quite a few people, especially I would argue, younger folks who are really concerned in particular about climate change, but still there's a lot of resistance. And some of that resistance you might argue is unreasonable or just pure selfishness and not very short-term thinking. That's fine. But some of it has to be rooted in some reasonable fear. Help me understand what that's about. Help me understand what you think of as legitimate concerns about what you are suggesting.
So if I was a benevolent dictator for the day, I just want to set the context for this. I would finally give us universal basic income for everybody. And those folks who don't need it will spend it on t-shirts, and other people will do whatever they want to do with it. I could care less. But I think the idea that you don't have your basic needs covered in a country that has this much access to wealth it didn't deserve, I think we need to be smart about that. So beyond opening universal basic income, people will no longer have to pay for healthcare. We would defund the police. And what I mean by that is divest. We would divest our greatest resources. You can tell what you care about by what's in your budget. And that's whether you're a single mom waiting at home, whether you are a grocer budgeting for the next 10 years, whether you are Starbucks, your budget tells the story of what you really care about. And so at the end of the day, it would be really, really smart for us to stop spending so much money on weapons that people are forced to fight and start spending it on care and and repair. Feminists and the Feminist Green New Deal call this the care economy. It's really important for us to start thinking about that because, as was mentioned throughout this conversation, we're all suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Like, regardless of what side you land on, the fear is coming from people really, that the Freudian part of the brain, that area that figures out whether you need to fight or a flight response kicks in.
Brain.
Is really, yes, that part of your brain really is what people are operating from. They are not acting out of lofty goals and imagining themselves as Lin-Manuel Miranda because they're not thinking about Hamilton. Because they are imagining themselves as patriots, it's because they're terrified that the thing that they have hid behind, which is a racialized identity and class privilege, will not save them from what's coming. So I actually think we can form a bigger table of conversation where folks would be willing to stop worrying about who is being saved and start worrying about who it is we are setting into sacrifice zones to die if we do nothing differently. If people realize their basic needs will be cared for. As a former lobbyist at a bunch of different levels, I can tell you part of why it was easy for me to talk to anyone is because I've never met a single person who's a parent who doesn't want their kid to have nice teeth and go to a good school. And so a great way to talk to someone about what they're concerned about, where they're going to go, is figuring out what they're vested in. And everybody wants to avoid dying on a fiery gas ball. It's just some of us think that by seizing the means of production, holding on to the ways that we have done business, they will have enough capital to escape the worst consequences, get a ticket to Mars and hang out with Elon Musk in a bulletproof, really ugly car. So I don't actually think those folks are sizing us up to destroy us. They're just looking at the pie as zero sum and deciding that they need to have it all. And so I do think that if we start to flatten the basic premises of what it means to be a person, people will be less like that. There will always be weirdos on either side, but we're really good at punishment. So I'm more concerned about us plunging a lot of other people into that by not taking care of their basic needs.
I mean, the fear of being poor, keeping people poor, sick, and uneducated.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that is, and divided. And in a country that has so much abundance, all right. Now, of course, it's a huge country, and you can argue, of course, depending on where you are, but depending on where you are determines so much. Mm-hmm. And that the COVID belt, the diabetes belt, the high blood pressure belt, that belt is still the former Confederacy because it's been kept as the former Confederacy. And we're still having arguments about pulling down monuments to people, from 150 years ago. That is so embedded right across the river from where I live, that people will fight you about this. And they're still, they ran around the Capitol with flags we're the only country that lets the loser create the history of this cause, this lost cause, right? Okay, no other country does that. When you lose, you're X'd out of history. Yeah. And so the North allowed it with this, allowed the South to do that. It's everybody's been complicit in order to keep African Americans, since we're pretty, Black panel here, to keep us in our place and, slavery by another name as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So, and so that has been what Tamara's been saying, because that has been the way they still want to get that means of production as cheaply as possible. So there's all kinds of ways now with all the gig economy to do that. And there's all kinds of ways to make it sound like, oh, you have autonomy and all these, all these things, all these things we sell ourselves. And, people wanting to have an upper middle class life. I have an upper middle class life. Mm-hmm. And, being able to honor the work of my family, my parents, and to what I consider doing good, at the same time, and to rationalize that. But at the same time, working within a system as much as possible and trying to push it. But it isn't, the incrementalism now, as I've gotten older, it concerns me. And the fact that what is availed of some communities who are able to get cleaner, cleaner industry or clean energy, as opposed to, many communities who are still stuck with getting the worst industries, and that's the only option they get because they feel like that's all they deserve.
So here I want to ask one more question before we end, and it's kind of a big one, end on, but I'll do it anyway. So what you highlighted was that this is a country of a lot of abundance, and I think a number of people in the corporate system that we've been talking about, that you've been talking about, in a way that suggests it's not working for the people. People in that system would suggest that the abundance is in part a function of the way the corporate system is organized. So I guess, what would you tell those people? Like, how can you still continue to produce the economic abundance through the corporate system, and have those corporations be a part of the solution to the problems you all are talking about? Like, how would you address people that work for those corporations, own those corporations, depend on those corporations?
Oh my gosh, I'll start because I've been thinking about this a lot. One, I cultivate relationships with folks who build their businesses outside of an extractive system. So there are folks, there's a whole brand of B Corps that are trying that out as an experiment. They have a different kind of bottom line. They're not altruistic, but they have factored in the things that matter to them into their mission, which taps into a zeitgeist coming from a whole generation of people who no longer want to find out in a documentary that everything they're doing is paying for oppression double the price. So I do think that there are like some real opportunities for experiments there. In banking, that national green banking is an alternative to continuing to bank in ways that subsidize things you don't like. If what you're doing is putting money into the next economy and tripling every dollar, that's a real conversation that's happening inside of Congress. It's coming from a bunch of different places at once. The idea that this administration is taking up the social cost of carbon means we're no longer writing it on our arm or putting it on the arm. I'm from Brooklyn, so like every third person there will tell you, oh, you just put it on the arm, move on. So the idea that you could just write it off for tomorrow is no longer a thing that's true. We can't send the externalities to someone else. So if we can reform banking by pointing out who the bad guys are, if we can make insurance invest in communities instead of divesting them and picking and choosing winners and losers in climate change by freezing the ability to recover assets lost, if we can deal with reinsurance as it puts a price tag on every plant and every coral reef and decide whether or not that's how we want to work, I do think there are models where we're asking the question. And I don't think that we have utopia or that anyone has the answer to that, but I do think we have some good questions and it might be worth examining them at this time. And there are enough examples of folks who want to do that. There are entire business structures that focus on the care economy and mutual aid. Part of earlier in our conversation, we talked about the 4 generations of folks in this work. I would argue that in the pandemic, mutual aid showed up to do way more for people than the government didn't do. And that wasn't for anything. It was because people stood up to find out who was in their community and figure out how they could redistribute resources. People are doing it in terms of Bitcoin. I don't want to make anybody feel bad about that cryptocurrency one way or the other, but it is about people. There are groups of people coming up with piles of money and what my grandma used to call a susu to figure out how to pay their medical bills by piling their money together and pay off their debts. We have always figured this stuff out at multiple levels. And I think the only problem we have is if we foreclose our creativity by deciding that what is all there is. So I actually think this is a time that's full of really ripe examples. Even land back and talking about what it means to return the land to the original stewards. There are examples of that happening right now in Canada, where people returned the land to the indigenous community that was there. And guess what? People still live in their same condos. They just pay their taxes to the people whose land it is. So I actually think there are tons of really great examples of us undoing the things that we've done wrong, but they haven't made it to the mainstream because we're too busy talking about the woman who flew in a jet to cosplay storming the government. So I think perhaps if we flipped our media narrative a little bit, we could cover some of these stories of people really making different choices.
Yeah, there's a lot of great examples. I mean, as Tamara said earlier, I mean, budgets reflect priorities. So, we have a huge military budget for what? We're not, where are we, are we really going to prosecute wars against people who are, desperate and because of climate disruption, are running into conflicting with each other. And that's what I say about abundance. Instead of being in the scarcity mindset, that we have, and that there are so many people in so many communities who, would have more solutions if they just had the ability to not be thinking hour to hour, day to day. All these local, and so that's what she's. I mean, I'm just trying to echo her. I'm just trying to be like you, Tamara. But
love you too.
Yeah, but so and that availing communities like Uniontown, Alabama, who got after there was a terrible coal ash spill in Tennessee, and that toxic coal ash was trucked to Uniontown, Perry County, Alabama, the poorest county in Alabama. And those people, the only option for an economic development was they'd pay them $1 million to put that toxic coal ash in their in their landfill that was unlined. That was their only economic development option. And why are these people always availed of these things? All right. And so these are the issues of, the burdens always being in these communities. Why are the same communities flooding all the time? Because they were segregated in the bottoms, all right, and all over the country, not just the South. Everybody wants to make like the South is the big boogeyman. It's very annoying. It's all over, and in California, and so and in the North and in the Midwest. And I just think that if we're truly going to survive, the internal part of really understanding what it is to be a human, and treating and doing that is really going to have to play out, like I said, externally now. We just can't, it's just, we are in this existential crisis, but it's also a spiritual crisis of not recognizing other people's humanity.
So that's a great place to end. I hope we can all learn to recognize each other's humanity a little bit more. And I thank you both for taking the time to talk to us, raising the questions and offering different ways of thinking about the issues that we face. So thank you both so much.
Thank you. Fun.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I'd like to hang out a little bit and I'll talk to you all just a few more minutes. But for everyone else, thank you all for listening tonight. If you're interested in talking more about climate, the Stanford GSB is having a climate conference that takes place on February 10th, and we'll have a strong focus on environmental justice and racial equity. If you're interested, go to gsbclimateinnovation.com to register. It's in the chat. Again, if you're interested in that, it's at gsbclimateinnovation.com. If you enjoyed this podcast or enjoyed this webinar, share Leadership for Society podcast with your friends. You can find it anywhere you get your podcast. Thank everyone. Thank you all for joining. We'll see you next time.